Hey guys, tonight we're weaving ourselves into a quiet story of still air, woven mats, and the faint scent of coconut oil drifting lazily on the breeze. You're lying on a bannig, a hand-woven sleeping mat made from dried palm or seagrass leaves, the kind that creaks just slightly beneath your weight as you shift, trying to get comfortable without waking the mosquitoes. The roof above you is made of nipa, the same thatch found across the many islands of the Philippines, and it sighs when the wind touches it. No glass windows. Just wooden shutters, cracked open, letting in the distant sounds of a gecko arguing with no one in particular. You probably wouldn't survive this setup. No mattress, no air conditioning, no blackout curtains, and definitely no melatonin gummies. But here, in this imagined past, you make do. Everyone does. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments, what time is it where you are, and what part of the world are you listening from? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It starts with the bannig. Not quite a bed, not quite the floor. You sleep on it, you sit on it, you spread it out for guests like it's an extra-large doily your grandmother would be proud of. But sleeping on a bannig isn't just about where you lay, it's about the feel of the cool fibers beneath you as night settles. The weave isn't just practical, it's cultural. Patterns vary from region to region, often so subtle you wouldn't notice unless someone pointed it out while fanning you lazily with a woven palm. Historians still argue whether the bannig's use for sleeping evolved from spiritual practice or pure practicality. Either way, it beats moss. Now, there's a rhythm to bedtime here, long before clocks ruled the day. The sky, always the boss, decides when sleep begins. The moment stars blink into visibility, your chores slow down. Chickens are already roosting, pigs grumble a few final complaints, and someone somewhere coughs dramatically into the dark, possibly to get out of sweeping. You lie on the bannig, not quite ready for sleep. The air is warm and sticky, but you're used to that. A child might hum a tune. A grandmother might be telling the same story she always tells, the one about the man who fell asleep under a mango tree and dreamed of a golden chicken. It never ends the same way twice. Then comes the lull of the kuliglig, the crickets. They play the same sleepy symphony every night, louder than you'd think, but soothing in a way that only insects who don't pay rent can manage. Sometimes, frogs join in, especially during the rainy season. One frog might sound like a loose hinge, another like a tiny drunk saxophonist. Together, though, surprisingly relaxing. You swat at something, probably imaginary, and pull a woven blanket of sorts over yourself. The air smells like the daytime, sun-baked earth and the fading ghost of boiled rice, but it's slowly giving way to the scent of the night, waxy leaves, wet bamboo, and maybe the distant drift of wood smoke. There's no electricity, no glow from your phone, no glow from anyone else's either. The dark is actually dark. Yet it's also gentle, not the sharp, unsettling darkness of a city blackout, but the soft kind that wraps around you like a grandma's arm during a scary story. The houses are built on stilts, with floors that breathe, literally. Gaps in the slats let air flow through, a passive cooling system courtesy of thousands of years of trial, error, and tropical weather complaints. You hear someone walking across their hut next door, the creak of bamboo, followed by a soft thud. Maybe they're settling in for the night too. Or maybe they've just remembered they left the coconut oil lamp burning a bit too high. Ah yes, the ting hoi, but we'll get to that in the next section. Back here on your mat, you wonder briefly if the rat who lives under the bamboo floorboards is asleep yet. Probably not. He's the nocturnal sort. Likes to shuffle dramatically as if auditioning for a sound effects role in an amateur horror movie. Now remember, people didn't just sleep at night in the pre-colonial Philippines. They also slept during the day. Siestas were, and still are in many places, a legitimate form of rest. The midday heat insists on it. You'd crawl into the shade, maybe behind a woven room divider, and surrender to the hum of the fan, if you're lucky, or the buzz of the cicadas, if you're not. And yet, night sleep was different. It felt more symbolic. It wasn't just physical rest. There were taboos involved. You don't go to bed angry. You don't talk loudly while someone else is trying to fall asleep, unless you're over the age of 70 or have earned the right through sheer dramatic storytelling ability. Even the position of your bannig could matter. Some believed that sleeping with your head facing west was bad luck, that's where the sun dies every day. Which, let's be honest, is kind of poetic but also a little morbid. Now, here's the quirky part. If someone in your household had trouble sleeping, the remedy wasn't herbal tea or a late-night scroll through memes. No, you called the local babalan, a female, or sometimes male, spiritual intermediary. But that's for later too. Right now, you're still lying here, feeling the grooves of the mat beneath your skin, wondering whether the fireflies you saw earlier were regular fireflies or, just maybe, ancestral spirits checking in. It's a 50-50, really. And so, lulled by the smell of woven grass, the sound of palm fronds whispering against one another, and the musical clatter of insects auditioning for an all-night symphony, you begin to drift. The soft flicker of the ting hoi dances across the bamboo slats, casting sleepy gold halos onto the nipa ceiling. You don't quite stare at it, you just sense it, warm and wavering, like the last candle at a birthday party after everyone's forgotten to blow it out. The ting hoi is a coconut oil lamp, and if it were a person, it'd be the kind who hums to themselves while sweeping. Not loud. Not pushy. Just there. Gentle and glowing. This humble lamp was often made from a repurposed bottle, a bit of tin, or even an old coconut shell, with a wick carefully held in place. You'd fill it with lana, that's coconut oil, and light it just as twilight shrugs into night. Sometimes it smells faintly sweet, like roasted coconut. Other times, it's a bit smoky, depending on how old the oil is. Either way, the glow is soft and unbothered, like a firefly who knows it's not the brightest but still shows up. Historians still argue whether the ting hoi was more than just a light source. Some think it had a role in rituals, like serving as a kind of spiritual GPS beacon for wandering ancestors. Others say that's just romantic speculation, that people probably lit it because, well, falling over your own chickens in the dark is embarrassing. But let's be honest, it feels magical either way. You lie there, watching the glow shimmer and stretch with the breeze. Sometimes it looks like it's breathing. A living thing. And maybe that's the point. Maybe that warm light was never just about vision, it was about presence. A signal that the day was over, and that your tiny slice of the world was now tucked in. The lamp was usually placed near the door or in a corner, where its light could reach as much of the small hut as possible. Some families had more than one, but just one could turn a room of shadows into something tender and safe. There's no plastic lampshade, no sterile LED glow. Just the rich amber of a live flame, fluttering with every little gust that tiptoes through the woven walls. Coconut oil, by the way, wasn't just for lighting. It was basically the MVP of the pre-colonial Philippines. If something needed cooking, soothing, shining, healing, or lubricating, yes, even that, the answer was almost always, have you tried coconut oil? It's the duct tape of tropical life. Now here's a fringe detail. Some say families would whisper their dreams or wishes to the ting hoi before blowing it out. Kind of like telling your secrets to a houseplant. Harmless, vaguely therapeutic, and oddly comforting. Whether it's true or not, you picture a child leaning close, blinking slowly, murmuring something about a future mango harvest or a wish for rain. As the wick burns low, you watch the shadow of your own fingers twitch across the bamboo floor. The light makes every movement look important, like you're casting spells by accident. The ting hoi doesn't judge. It just flickers. The funny part? These oil lamps had a stubborn streak. If the wind was too playful or if the oil ran low, the ting hoi might just snuff itself out, mid-thought. Which led to a common phrase, still used in some rural places, about going out like a ting hoi, meaning fading quietly, without fuss. The kind of exit a sleepy grandparent might admire. Of course, in wealthier households or in villages closer to trade routes, other lamps made of brass or ceramics showed up later on. More ornate, fancier flames. But the coconut-based ting hoi? That one always stuck around, like the friend who never left your side when you had a fever. Humble, helpful, and not trying to impress anyone. And yes, for the record, it's not exactly OSHA-approved. A knock of the elbow, a curious child, or an enthusiastic house lizard could turn a quiet evening into a smoky panic. But somehow, it usually worked out. Filipino houses back then were like the people who lived in them, resilient, adaptable, and always finding ways to stay standing, even in the breeze. You stretch a little, shifting on the banig again. The lamp's glow dances on your arm, like a soft tattoo that only exists at night. Outside, a dog barks once, then reconsiders. Maybe it was dreaming. Or maybe it saw one of those night spirits people whisper about but never name. You don't ask. Better to let it go. And here's something scholars debate. Was the ting hoi a purely domestic object, or did it travel outdoors too? Some argue that wandering healers and midwives would carry one, shielding it from the wind with their hands like a priest guarding a sacred ember. Others think that's just poetic license. Either way, you can imagine it, a figure moving through rice paddies, the lamp bobbing like a golden fish in the darkness. You close your eyes briefly, listening to the room shift and creak with the natural groaning of woven wood and sleeping breath. The ting hoi still burns, but lower now. Drowsier. You kind of want to thank it, which feels weird until you remember how quiet and kind it's been, holding space for your drifting thoughts without asking for much in return. Eventually, someone in the house, probably the eldest, will lean over and blow it out in one practiced puff. No words, no drama. Just that one short exhale, like closing a book. And the room will sink into a deeper shade of dark. Not scary. Not silent. Just final, and full of potential. But until then, you lie there, cocooned in the flickering hush of coconut oil light, listening to time loosen its grip on everything around you. The ting hoi burns low as the night deepens, but your thoughts drift elsewhere, to the way people actually slept in these homes. Not just lay down, but the whole routine around it. The ritual. The shared choreography of settling in when electricity wasn't a thing, and your mattress was basically the firm embrace of the floor. You're lying on a banig, a woven mat made of pandan or buri leaves, maybe even some seagrass if you're near the coast. It's not cushy. It doesn't fluff. But it somehow breathes beneath you, whispering a quiet crackle with every subtle shift of your limbs. It's cool when you first lie down, and then it gently warms beneath your weight, like it's acknowledging you. It's not a mattress, it's a mutual agreement. Most families didn't have private bedrooms. Instead, everyone rolled out their banig in the main room of the Bahay Kubo, those thatched bamboo houses built up on stilts like they're trying to tiptoe over the earth itself. Your sleeping space wasn't a personal kingdom. It was a zone in a rotating schedule of rest. Whoever got tired first might claim the quietest corner. Whoever snored the loudest got gently nudged with a foot by a sibling who really wanted to dream in peace. There were blankets, too, but thin ones, sometimes hand-woven, other times just large pieces of cloth known as katsa, originally flour sacks reused for nearly everything, including pajamas. If you've never worn a repurposed sack to bed, you haven't lived the rustic dream. Oddly soft, surprisingly cozy, and always with a story to tell. Now, here's where it gets weird in the best possible way. Some families had a sukab rule, a belief that only a certain number of people could sleep side by side during specific seasons or under particular lunar phases. It was said to keep spirits calm and dreams from overlapping in strange ways. Historians still argue whether this was more superstition or a clever strategy for personal space when 5 siblings were all angling for the cool side of the room. You shift again on your imaginary banig, feeling the air move lightly above your toes. There's no air conditioning. Just the natural draft of windows made from slatted bamboo or kaipai shells, and the occasional handheld pei fan dropped beside someone's arm mid-wave when they gave up and fell asleep. Silence isn't truly silent here. It's filled with a small symphony of tick-tick-ing geckos, frogs tuning up like drunk violinists, and the occasional sigh of bamboo stretching after a hot day. Let's not forget the kalambo, a mosquito net, but really, more like a floating castle made of gauze. Hanging, it was part of the evening routine. Someone would carefully tuck its edges under each corner of the banig, like sealing a soft force field against the tiny vampires of the tropics. Inside, the world slowed down. The net diffused the light, muffled the breeze, and turned every breath into something sacred. And oh, the bedtime stories. These weren't tales downloaded from some sleep podcast. These were oral spells, passed down from memory like precious recipes. You hear the voice now, probably your Lola, voice like warm molasses and a bit of gravel. She's telling you about the aswang in the banana grove, or the duend who gets very offended if you sit on their mound without apologizing. You giggle once, then remember not to laugh too loud. You wouldn't want the duend to take it the wrong way. Each story served a purpose. Scare you just enough to make you stay inside after dark, teach you why it's polite to excuse yourself near anthills, and remind you that this world was never just yours, it was shared with things too old to explain. Sometimes, these tales wound down into chants, soft lullabies that weren't quite songs, not quite prayers. Just gentle drones, often in the local dialect, about the moon, or the sea, or some animal behaving itself. You try humming one now, just under your breath, and it wraps around you like the curve of the bannig. Comforting, rhythmic, and a little hypnotic. Some nights, if there was a healer or babalin in the village, she'd stop by. Not for illness, but for dream checkups. That's right, people believed your dreams could reveal things about your body, your relationships, or your future. If you dreamed of muddy water, someone might interpret it as a warning. If you dreamed of losing a tooth, that could mean a death. Or just bad dental hygiene, but we won't get into that. Historians still debate whether these dream consultations were formalized rituals or more like gossip with spiritual overtones. Either way, they mattered. People took their dreams seriously, treating them not as random noise, but as coded messages from the other side of consciousness. And who's to say they weren't? Meanwhile, sleeping positions weren't just comfort-based. Some believed it was unlucky to sleep with your feet pointing toward the door. It made it easier for spirits to pull you out, like ghostly tow trucks. So you curled up diagonally or reversed your bannig to face a different wall, even if that meant sharing a pillow with your cousin's foot. Compromises were made. Oh, and pillows? Those were sometimes carved from wood. Yes, you heard that right. Wooden headrests, shaped like a low bench or curve, meant to support the neck and protect elaborate hairstyles or just keep your dreams aligned with the stars. Surprisingly ergonomic, if you don't mind a bit of austerity with your REM cycle. Tonight, though, you get the soft kind, stuffed with kapok or rice husks, perhaps. Slightly lumpy, slightly warm, just like a pillow should be when shared by generations. You're starting to fade now. Not because you're bored, though maybe just a little, but because all these layers of evening routine, the mat, the net, the stories, the breeze, are doing exactly what they've done for centuries, pulling you down, gently, into a safe and dream-rich sleep. The wind shifts, and a bamboo slat taps gently against the frame of the window, just enough to nudge your thoughts further. The darkness is deep now, soft and blue, like being wrapped in an old cotton shirt that's been worn too many times to count. And in that hush, a flicker of light catches your eye. It's not from the moon, or a candle. No, this light dances. Warm. Orange. Faintly pulsing. It's a coconut lamp. Specifically, a lamp fashioned from the husk or shell of a coconut, filled with oil, usually from the same fruit, and lit with a braided cotton wick. Primitive. Sure. Elegant. Definitely. Something about the humble coconut getting repurposed into a guiding star for the night feels, well, poetic. Like a nod from the universe saying, even leftovers can be magical. You sit beside it now, the lamp wobbling slightly in a shallow ceramic dish. The flame leans with the breeze, then rights itself again, a little warrior in a shell. This coconut, once hacked open with a BOLO knife and turned into tomorrow's meal, now holds its final job, standing guard through the long, still hours. The scent of the oil drifts toward you, nutty, faintly smoky. It's a smell you wouldn't find on store shelves, not quite. Somewhere between fireplace and breakfast, with a whisper of rain. These coconut lamps weren't just for light, they were for rituals. And not necessarily dramatic, fire and chants kind of rituals. More like daily reverence. A lamp was often lit at dusk as part of evening prayers, or as a beacon for someone returning late from the fields. You'd see its glow flickering from inside a bamboo window, telling you that someone's still awake. Someone's still waiting. In some villages, the lamp had a role in dream navigation, especially when placed beside a sleeping person's head. The light, it was believed, could guide the soul safely through the dream realm, like a lighthouse for your subconscious. Historians still argue whether this was an animistic belief or a remnant of early Islamic or Hindu influences, because the Philippines, much like a good coconut stew, is a layered blend of things that probably shouldn't work together, but absolutely do. The wick itself was an art form. A too thin wick wouldn't hold a flame. Too thick, and the oil would burn too fast. So grandmothers would twist cotton just so, whispering the trick to their grandkids who definitely weren't listening but would one day remember anyway. And every lamp had its own character. Some sputtered like an old man with opinions. Others burned proud and upright, as if competing with the stars. And, occasionally, a lamp wasn't lit for the living. You've heard the whispers. That sometimes, especially after a death, a small coconut lamp would be placed on the floor beside a mat, no one lying on it, just a flame and an offering. Rice, a boiled egg, maybe a little salt. Not for the family. For the kaluluwa, the spirit. A ritual act called a tang, done to honor the departed, or coax a restless ghost into peaceful slumber. You'd never admit it, but once as a kid, you crept past one of these midnight offerings and tried to peek at the flame, half hoping to see something floating above it. You didn't. But the memory stuck, like warm oil on your fingertips. Back in your hut now, the lamp throws shadows across the woven walls. Your eyes trace the slow undulation of light over every texture, the frayed edges of the roof, the flickering legs of a bamboo bench, a wooden spoon left carelessly upright in a tin bowl. The house feels alive in the quiet, all of it breathing with you. People say the coconut is the tree of life, and they're not exaggerating. It gave your ancestors food, drink, soap, rope, oil, vinegar, combs, spoons, roofing, mats, and yes, even bedtime lighting. No battery needed. Just fire, fruit, and a little intention. You watch the lamp for a while longer, noticing how the flame dances when your breath brushes it. It almost reacts, like it's aware of you. And maybe, just maybe, it is. In some coastal regions, especially in the Visayas, the coconut lamp was believed to attract unseen visitors. Not evil ones, necessarily. Just watchers. Beings who liked the glow. So some households placed small charms near the lamp, a bit of crushed garlic, a sprig of tanglad, lemongrass, or a folded paper triangle tucked under the bowl. Not quite protective. More like polite deterrence. The equivalent of leaving a sticky note that says, "Occupied," in the language of shadows. These charms were handmade and passed down, their recipes part herbalism, part folk magic. And scholars today still can't agree whether these were actually effective traditions or just, ante-level overcaution. But try skipping it one night and suddenly every floorboard creaks louder, and that little bowl of rice next to the lamp looks suspiciously disturbed. You wouldn't risk it either. Tonight, though, the lamp is calm. You feel its warmth even from a few feet away, a gentle assurance that you're not entirely alone. That someone, somewhere in the lineage of your bones, once sat exactly like this, squinting into a tiny flame made possible by a tree and a little ingenuity. You yawn once, loud enough to startle the gecko on the beam above. It chirps back indignantly, as if offended by your volume. You whisper an apology. The lamp flutters once and settles. And just when you think you've finally understood the whole point of it, you remember the final, oddest thing. Coconut lamps were occasionally used to test honesty. Yes, seriously. In some mountain communities, there's an old tale where a person suspected of lying had to hold a coconut lamp through the night. If the flame flickered or died, it meant guilt. If it stayed steady till dawn, truth. Imagine your nightly sins being judged by a nut-based lantern. Bit of pressure, no? You smile in the dark, eyes almost closed now, as the lamp keeps glowing, burning gently just beside your dreams. Somewhere in the background, a rooster crows a bit too early, as if it's as confused about time as you are. You groan softly and roll to your side, the mat beneath you still warm from your body. The coconut lamp has burned low now, the last bit of oil sputtering faintly as the wick curls inward. But the village around you is already stirring, and with morning comes an entirely different rhythm. You shuffle out quietly, rubbing sleep from your eyes, past open doorways and earthen stoves just beginning to smoke. And the scent that hits you next. Burned coconut husk, crushed ginger, and boiled rice, the unofficial aroma of a Filipino morning. But let's hold on to the sleepy thread a little longer, because not all rituals end with nightfall. In fact, some of the most intriguing sleep traditions happened before people even got into bed. You arrive at a hut with an open awning and a familiar shape on the woven mat, a bundle of herbs, bound in banana leaf and tied with string. You remember this. You used to lie beside it as a child. This is the sleep sachet, or as your great-aunt insisted on calling it, pampachaloging mayos. These herbal bundles varied from island to island, household to household. Some were hung from rafters. Some were tucked into headscarves. Others, usually the stubborn kind, were placed right on your chest as you slept. Like an herb-powered weighted blanket for the soul. The base ingredients were usually calming or fragrant. Dried pandan, ilong-ilong petals, lemongrass, a sprig of sambong, maybe a slice of calamansi peel. But sometimes a parent would sneak in a few slivers of bawang, garlic, not for scent, but for defense. And we're not talking vampires, but lamang lupa, spirits of the land, often mischievous and annoyingly fond of hiding your left slipper. This little sachet wasn't just meant to help you sleep, it was supposed to protect your dreams. Because in the older belief systems of the archipelago, dreaming wasn't just subconscious spaghetti. It was a journey, and you needed guidance. If you drifted off improperly, too fast, too worried, too full of pork stew, your soul might wander too far or get tricked by the creatures in the in-between. So the sachet acted like a sleepy little anchor, keeping you tethered, centered, smelling vaguely like a tropical greenhouse. Historians still argue whether these sachets came from pre-colonial Babylon, shamanic practice, or were more of a household folk invention. But either way, they worked just well enough that no one dared skip them when times got weird. Speaking of weird, remember the tabi-tabi habit? Where you mumble apologies when walking past bushes or anthills. Turns out, sleep rituals had their own version. Before lying down, elders would whisper a few short words over their mats. Usually something simple, like Tabunan ako sa kalana, which loosely means, cover me in peace. You'd think this was just sentimental, but some people believed that these mats were doors, soft, slatted portals between the waking and the sleeping world. And you don't walk through a portal without knocking first, right? This cultural blending gets even more curious when you look at colonial-era texts, where Spanish priests wrote, sometimes grumpily, about pagan nighttime behaviors that involved whispering to the floor and burning leaves under the bed. They didn't understand it. They thought it was devilry. But really, it was people trying to find a little safety in the long, uncertain dark. Like all of us do, just with better ventilation. One fringe tradition, still barely surviving in parts of Mindanao, involved carving tiny human figures out of soapstone and placing them beneath pillows. These were called panaginip guides, and their job was to intercept nightmares. Sort of like security guards for your REM cycle. There's little academic consensus on where this started. Some say it's Islamic, others call it animist, and a few claim it was invented by a lonely sculptor who had way too much soapstone. Either way, it adds to the Dreamland toolkit. And then there's the lullabies. Oh, the lullabies. Not the Western ones, with cradles falling from trees and questionable parenting metaphors. No, Filipino lullabies were earthy, repetitive, almost chant-like. A mix of Hiligaynon, Ilocano, Tagalog, and everything in between, often delivered half-sung, half-whispered, with one palm gently smoothing a baby's brow. They almost never rhymed. They weren't trying to be cute. They told slow, rhythmic stories, of fireflies lost in the dark, of mangoes falling at dawn, of a rooster who forgot how to crow. And somehow, that was enough. The child would slip into slumber with that same steady rhythm still echoing in their chest, like the tide tapping against the edge of a canoe. You try humming one now, badly, off-key, and chuckle to yourself. It's all right. Even the best lullabies, when sung alone, sound a bit like talking to ghosts. Which, in a way, you are. All those voices, all that memory, stitched into a simple tune. You sit now by an open window, watching as dawn drips into the trees, slow and syrupy. Someone a few huts down strikes a pot with a ladle, probably by accident, and the village dog decides it's a personal attack. But inside, there's still a hush. The quiet knowledge that morning isn't full yet. That the rituals of sleep, the sachets, the lamps, the whispered apologies, are still hovering in the air like breath on glass. And as you rise and fold your mat, your eyes land on one last object, a small woven charm, shaped like a fish, tucked into the roof beam. You'd forgotten it was there. Supposedly, if placed correctly, it kept bad dreams from returning. Not blocked, exactly. Just redirected. Back out the window. Or maybe into someone else's hut, depending on how tidy your soul was. You smile and make a mental note to clean your soul soon. The sachet crinkles as you pick it up, still faintly fragrant. You press it to your face, inhaling a mix of herbs and memories and something unnameable. And just like that, you're ready. For the day. For the rituals. For whatever comes next, hopefully with fewer ghost fish. You stretch your arms overhead and crack your neck gently, standing in the filtered light that spills through the nipa roof. A few golden flecks dance on the packed dirt floor. Someone's rooster, possibly the same one who failed to read the memo on sunrise timing, crows again, definitely louder this time. You try not to take it personally. Outside, the village continues to rouse itself like an orchestra tuning up, spoons clinking, chickens gossiping, children whispering conspiratorially about skipping chores. But tucked quietly into all this morning motion is one of the most understated but sacred transitions in Filipino households, the gentle undoing of sleep. Sleep isn't something that just happens here. It's not a mindless fall into unconsciousness and then a rude awakening by an alarm clock. It's a process, and as you're realizing, it has a graceful exit ramp, too. You glance over and see someone slowly rolling up a banig, that hand-woven mat made from dried palm or reed leaves. You've slept on one before, thin but surprisingly supportive, and just squeaky enough to remind you that even your dreams have a soundtrack. The act of folding it in the morning is quiet, respectful. A small ritual in and of itself. It tells the room, thank you for the rest. We'll try not to bother you until tonight. And woven into the fibers of that mat are generations of muscle memory. Your great-grandmother folded it this way. Her sister tucked the corners under like that. Someone's uncle, probably a little drunk, used it as a cape once. These things happen. Once the mat is put away, your host takes a worn coconut shell dipper and pours water into a wide clay basin. It's time for the morning wash, which is less about hygiene and more about shaking off the dream world. The first splash is always to the face, eyes, temples, lips, followed by an exhale and a whispered name. Not your own. The name of whoever you saw in your dream, if you can remember it. This was meant to release any lingering influence or energy they might have left behind. Historians still argue whether this practice was animist in origin or simply symbolic, but one Spanish friar wrote that it was curiously devout, as if the dreamer believes their vision had power over the waking. And yes, Father Gregorio, that was kind of the point. Because in pre-colonial Filipino thought, the boundaries between sleep and wakefulness weren't fences. They were screens. Thin ones. Breezy ones. If you didn't shake off the dream properly, it might tag along all day, whispering odd things in your ear when you're trying to cook rice. You've felt that before, haven't you? That lingering mood after a strange dream? Multiply that by 100 years of family stories and you've got the reason people here were so careful with their mornings. Next, someone lights a small coil of burned nipa and walks around the house counterclockwise. The smoke trails in lazy curls, faintly sharp with dried leaves and crushed betel nut. This is pausak, and no, it's not for mosquitoes, though it has that bonus. It's for clearing away the last of the sleep spirits. Sort of like giving your soul a stretch and a coffee. Minus the caffeine. A quirky footnote here. In some Visayan households, if someone had an especially vivid or disturbing dream, they were told to walk backward out of the house before breakfast, to confuse the dream. No historical record confirms whether this was effective, but at least one tale suggests it worked too well, and the dream confused itself into the neighbor's goat, which refused to sleep for 3 nights straight. Poor thing. Your host invites you to sit, and you're handed a steaming mug of salabat, ginger tea sweetened with a little brown sugar. It kicks a little. Your sinuses open like reluctant clams. And you notice the way the morning warmth pairs perfectly with the residual calm of a good sleep. It's not just about waking up. It's about transitioning. Even the placement of household items reflected this care. Coconut oil lamps were stored away before the sun was fully risen. Mirrors, if they existed, were covered with cloth at night and only uncovered after water had been poured. Some said it was to keep spirits from using them. Others simply didn't want to look puffy in the morning light. Can you blame them? There's also the matter of dream interpretation, which deserves a museum all its own. Dreaming of fish. That meant pregnancy. Dreaming of your teeth falling out? A family member was in danger. Flying in your sleep? Either you were spiritually gifted or just ate too much cassava. Auntie Mila swore that if you dreamed of chickens, you'd lose money. Which might just be her way of blaming poultry for her gambling habits, but still, it stuck. And if you couldn't remember your dream? That was fine too. Some believed those dreams were too sacred to hold on to. That your soul had done something important during the night, and you just weren't meant to know what. You'd simply splash water on your face, give a nod to the horizon, and move on. In this way, sleep and morning were never enemies. One wasn't erased by the other. They overlapped like ocean tides, one easing back as the other surged forward. You sip more salabat, the ginger warming your chest like a soft firecracker. The day has begun in full now. Pots clatter, children chase chickens with the least amount of strategic planning imaginable, and somewhere a radio picks up the crackle of Tagalog soap opera dialogue. But something in you is still tethered to the quiet that came before. The sachets. The chants. The coconut lamps blinking like fireflies in clay bowls. And as you look out toward the trees, where sunlight filters in like honey through old glass, you realize, sleep isn't just about darkness. It's about what we carry from it into the day. The scent of steaming rice now thickens the air, drifting in soft curls from a pot that crackles faintly over a wood fire. You're seated just outside the Bahay Kubo, your feet brushing over the sandy, leaf-littered yard. Morning has matured now. It's no longer delicate or dreamy. It has hips, elbows, a voice. Somewhere, a toddler shrieks in protest at being wiped down with cold water, and a dog responds as if personally offended. But you're relaxed. You're watching a banana leaf flutter in the breeze, still thinking about last night's sleep, and how it doesn't feel completely over yet. Because here in the Philippines, especially in the older provinces and archipelagic hinterlands, sleep extends itself. It has aftershocks. It is never just a thing that ends with sunrise. And now we arrive at one of the more mysterious chapters of these sleep traditions, the coconut lamps themselves. You blink slowly at the memory. Those tiny flickers last night, glowing like lazy fireflies in half-shells, casting golden shadows that made the walls ripple like pond water. They weren't there just to look charming or help you find your way to the nighttime latrine without stepping on a frog, though both were helpful features. No, coconut oil lamps were part of something older. Each one was placed intentionally, sometimes near the sleeping mat, sometimes at a doorframe, or beneath a hanging amulet of dried herbs and bird bones. The wick was often made of twisted cotton or juicy thread, floating in an oil base pressed from grated coconut flesh. Frugal, beautiful, and gently scented like the inside of a good dream. Historians agree that these lamps were used across the archipelago well before Spanish colonization, but they argue about why. Some suggest they kept evil spirits at bay, others believe they acted as guiding lights for the soul while it traveled during dreams. One theory even posits that the flickering flames served as a sort of soul tether, helping ensure the spirit could find its way back to the body before morning. Which, if true, makes you think twice about blowing one out just to save oil. In Ilocano households, it was said that the flame shouldn't be watched too closely. Staring at it could cause you to glimpse the other realm, and while fascinating, that sort of sightseeing came with risks. Like waking up with an extra shadow. Or worse, your neighbor's goat following you around all day again. You remember what happened last time. These lamps also had practical rhythms. They were lit at dusk, usually with a small prayer, and extinguished only after the final dream had ended, or when the first morning chore began. They marked liminality, not just illumination. Like a paper lantern on a quiet lake, floating between one state and the next. And if a coconut lamp flickered violently or went out on its own during the night, well, that was a topic for gossip. Maybe a passing spirit. Maybe someone in the household had wandered too far, soul-wise. Either way, it was worth asking the oldest person in the house for their thoughts. They'd probably pause, chew on some betel nut, and say something ominously vague like, "Ah, the wind knows who it touches." Helpful. Debatable. Atmospheric. Absolutely. By the way, if you're wondering, yes, people sometimes used actual carved coconut shells, but more often they were halved and cured, with the interior polished or blackened with ash to reduce the glare. Some families etched simple designs into the outer curve, sun patterns, star shapes, even initials. You might say it was the pre-industrial Filipino version of a custom lamp from Etsy, but with more chance of being spiritually possessed. Interestingly, in some regions, lamps were paired with stone bowls containing herbs, dried sambong, tanglad, and burnt tamarind leaves, to deepen sleep and scent the air. A sleepy smoker's potpourri, if you will. The combination was said to create heavier dreams, often interpreted as more meaningful visions or visitations. Some modern anthropologists question whether the herbs had any actual psychoactive properties or whether the effect was purely olfactory and symbolic. Either way, you're thinking you might need to replicate it sometime. And perhaps the quirkiest bit of all? Some coconut lamps were built with dual wicks, one longer than the other. The first would burn out within a few hours, while the second was designed to last until dawn. A kind of primitive alarm clock, signaling to early risers that they had just enough time to prepare breakfast before roosters started yodeling. These were mostly found in fishing villages, where timing meant everything. Of course, we haven't even talked about who lit the lamps. It was often the Lola, grandmother of the house. She'd do it with a quiet reverence, maybe murmuring a few words in a mix of old dialect and Catholic prayer. If you offered to help, she'd nod kindly but then hover over your shoulder like a safety inspector. After all, fire spirits aren't something you mess around with casually, darling. There's a comfort in it, isn't there? That someone took care of your sleep from the outside while you drifted off within. That even the flame had a job to do, guarding your breath, softening the air, guiding your soul back home if it strayed too far chasing a flying banana or a giggling ancestor. You finish your tea and glance at the now silent lamps, stacked on a bamboo shelf. Even extinguished, they feel watchful. Not threatening. Just aware. You breathe a little slower. Funny how in modern life we flick a switch without thinking, then tumble into bed with a screen 2 inches from our nose, hoping our brain figures out how to quiet itself. But in the old days, light wasn't just about seeing. It was about belonging, to a family, a rhythm, a world that believed sleep had shape and taste and rules. And you're beginning to feel them too. The softness. The structure. The small flame still glowing behind your eyes, even in the daylight. The day hums forward lazily, as if even the sun is wiping its eyes and stretching before doing anything important. Chickens peck at invisible mysteries near your toes, and somewhere behind the house, someone is chopping wood at the world's slowest tempo. You lean against the bamboo wall, full from breakfast, still warm from your bed mat, and completely enchanted by this sense that sleep, here, is a layered ceremony, not just a switch you flick off. And as you watch the shadows lengthen ever so slightly, your thoughts drift to another strange and beautiful custom you learned about last night. Sleep rituals shared by the whole community. Now, in most modern settings, sleep is your business and your business alone. Maybe you wear a silk mask. Maybe your neighbor listens to podcasts about serial killers while dozing off, which seems like a risky strategy, honestly. But in older Filipino communities, especially in rural barangays, sleep was rarely a solitary act. It was something done together. You'd sleep close. Literally and spiritually. One giant woven mat might host a grandmother, 2 cousins, a goat with strong boundaries, and someone's toddler whose foot always ends up in your face. Privacy? Not really. Comfort? Surprisingly, yes. There's something deeply reassuring about hearing other people breathing nearby. Their rhythm lulls you. Their soft snores remind you that everything is as it should be. It's like having built-in white noise, but warmer. And when someone suddenly stops snoring, now that's when everyone sits up at once and starts checking pulses. But beyond proximity, some communities practiced evening rituals that invited everyone to participate in the approach to sleep. These weren't full-blown ceremonies every night, no confetti or choirs, but small, habitual gatherings. Elders would call out stories from their beds. Children were encouraged to listen quietly, though this rule was, let's just say, flexibly enforced. These bedtime stories weren't just for entertainment. They were moral instruction, family history, and subtle gossip sessions all rolled into one. One night, it might be the tale of a golden crab that stole a prince's voice. Another night, a true account of a neighbor who once saw a duende smoking a pipe under a mango tree. Did it happen? Hard to say. But everyone agrees it's rude to question someone who claims to have spoken to a pipe-smoking goblin. Storytime eventually gave way to a collective silence, soft but heavy with meaning. This moment was known in some places as pananahimik, the deep hush before dreams. Talking after this point was discouraged, not out of strict rule, but respect. The stillness was considered sacred. You'd lie there listening to the last creaks of the house settling, the far-off laughter of someone not yet asleep, and maybe a bamboo wind chime swaying faintly in the night air. And then there was the practice of synchronized sleeping. That's not a joke. In small barangays, especially before the modern work schedule arrived, people truly did fall asleep and wake up together. It was partly survival. You needed everyone rested and coordinated for rice planting or fishing, and partly spiritual. A shared sleep meant a shared dreamscape, or at least a shared rhythm. This kept the community in tune, emotionally and cosmically. One Spanish friar once wrote, grudgingly, about entire huts, dimming their fires and lying down like a single creature. He seemed both bemused and unnerved. Maybe he missed having a pillow to himself. Scholars still argue whether this communal sleeping was more necessity or cultural value. Were they doing it for warmth and safety, or because they genuinely believed sleep was a collective act of harmony? Likely both. But one thing is certain, no one ever forgot the stories whispered before that hush, and no one wanted to be the person who burped loudly after the sacred quiet began. A quirkier twist to this collective sleep culture? Dream reporting. In some regions, particularly among Tagalog and Visayan speakers, there was a morning practice of sharing your dreams with others, usually over breakfast or while brushing your teeth with a stick. Not just for fun, dreams were seen as messages, puzzles, or sometimes even warnings. If someone dreamt of a fish jumping onto land, it might mean rain was coming. A snake. Trouble. Your ex wearing feathers and dancing in slow motion? That one might be more personal. These interpretations were often handled by the oldest member of the household or a respected dream reader, usually a woman, wrapped in several layers of cotton and wisdom. She'd nod, sip her rice coffee, and declare, "Ah, that's not a snake, it's envy. Stay away from anyone wearing green today." And just like that, your whole social calendar shifted. Sometimes, if multiple people dreamt similar themes, say, fire or water, it was taken as a communal omen, prompting extra caution or prayer. And if no one could remember their dream at all? That meant your soul had gone wandering too far, and someone might burn incense under your sleeping mat that night to call it back. Gently. Like a spiritual Uber. Even sleepwalking had its place. It wasn't necessarily seen as a medical issue. It could be the body responding to an unresolved dream quest. If someone rose and shuffled silently through the house in the dark, people might follow them to see if a message would be revealed. Not intervene, not wake them, just watch. Then gently lead them back. Imagine that, your midnight snack run turned into a village prophecy. And this brings us to a small curious detail you might have missed last night, how the beds were arranged. Often aligned east to west, to mimic the path of the sun. This wasn't about feng shui or aesthetic. It was about letting the sleeper's spirit rise and set in harmony with the world. Deviating from this was said to invite restless dreams or worse, spiritual indigestion. You've had that before. It feels like anxiety but tastes like eggplant. All these small customs, gently practiced by moonlight and memory, created a kind of sleep architecture, where rest wasn't just necessary, but sacred. You weren't drifting off alone in your thoughts. You were being held, softly, by the rituals of generations. Like being wrapped in a quilt woven from whispered stories and remembered dreams. A sleep not of escape, but of belonging. You're still lying there, well-fed, a little warm from the midday humidity, and filled with a growing appreciation for the strange art of sleeping, as if your dreams might get graded by your grandma. But now, you feel a slow tug of curiosity pulling you toward something even more specific. Something glowing faintly in the corners of your imagination. Coconut lamps. Not your usual IKEA stuff here. No plugs, no dimmer switches, no Wi-Fi-enabled nonsense. Just good old-fashioned hollowed-out coconut shells, filled with oil or wax, fitted with a small cotton wick, and balanced ever so delicately on carved bamboo stands. These weren't just for lighting. Oh no. These were sleep beacons, mood setters, protectors, and occasionally, according to some ants, portals for ancestral spirits, who probably just wanted to make sure you washed your feet before bed. In many Filipino households, especially in rural and coastal areas, coconut oil lamps were an essential part of bedtime. Placed near the family altar or beside the sleeping mat, they offered just enough flickering light to keep the night from feeling too large and too unknowable. That flame became the evening's heartbeat, tiny, warm, steady. It was like sleeping next to someone who always breathes in 4/4 time. Now, here's the charming twist. Each lamp was often personalized. Some were carved with family names, others etched with protective patterns or animal shapes, particularly carabaos, which were low-key the unofficial mascots of sleepy island life. Still others had holes punched through the shells in constellation-like patterns, creating little cosmic light shows on nipa hut walls. You didn't need a projector. Just a kid with a nail, a coconut husk, and a bit too much free time. But the coconut lamp wasn't just decorative. It had serious spiritual clout. Some families believed that a well-kept flame would ward off night spirits, especially the types who tripped over furniture and blamed it on the living. If the flame sputtered or went out unexpectedly, people took it seriously. Someone might mutter a prayer. Others would sprinkle salt near the door or burn herbs, just in case. And, as you might have guessed, scholars still argue whether this belief came from pre-colonial animist traditions, Spanish Catholic fusion, or simply a logical understanding that sudden drafts were suspicious. Either way, the lamps weren't to be ignored. Children were taught how to light and clean them with reverence. Even the simple act of refilling the lamp with coconut oil had its ritual. You'd hold the shell close, pour carefully from a gourd ladle, and pinch the cotton wick between two fingers like you were whispering to it. Some households insisted you whisper an intention into the lamp before lighting it, something soft like, "Protect this home. Let everyone rest." And if you accidentally said something snarky, well, you might wake up with a crick in your neck and a haunted spoon. But the real magic happened in how the light moved. Coconut oil flames don't burn with industrial steadiness. They flicker. They lean. They breathe. Watching one is like observing a tired ghost trying to dance to an invisible lullaby. They cast soft shadows that shift as the lamp burns down, creating an ever-changing theater on your bamboo ceiling. And here's a quirky piece of historical trivia. Some Filipino midwives, called hilat, used these lamps to judge whether a baby was going to be a calm sleeper. Supposedly, if a newborn didn't flinch at the flickering light or the faint pop of the oil catching, they were destined to be a good napper. No scientific proof, but certainly better odds than a vibrating bassinet from 2024. Now let's talk scent. Because coconut oil isn't scentless. It has this sweet, nutty warmth to it that seeps into the walls, into your clothes, and definitely into your dreams. The lamp became both a light source and a kind of ambient diffuser, though no one would have used that word. You'd fall asleep cradled in the smell of your own island. That's a level of branding even luxury candle companies haven't reached. Some households even infuse the oil with herbs or flowers, ylang-ylang, sampaguita, or crushed pandan, to enhance the calming properties. That's right, these people were doing aromatherapy centuries before spa chains figured out how to charge $120 for a diffuser that doesn't even look like a bird. The best blends were passed down secretly, like love letters in bottle form. You didn't just say, "It smells nice." You said, "That's Lola Alling's sleep oil. Don't waste a drop." Now, not everyone used coconut lamps. Beeswax candles had their moment, and in wealthier homes with access to imports, glass lanterns might show up now and then. But the coconut lamp held its ground as the great equalizer. Humble, homemade, and endlessly adaptable. You could find it in fishing villages, mountaintop farms, and in homes built on stilts above mangrove swamps. Even today, some remote communities still light them for power outages or during special holy days. And if you ask someone old enough, they'll tell you there's something about sleeping beside that kind of flame that modern light just can't mimic. It's slower, gentler. It listens when you exhale. One charming belief, less widely known, but deeply loved, is the idea that the flame remembers things. Like a pet, or a very nosy friend. Some grandmothers would murmur to their coconut lamps about the day's frustrations, small secrets, or unspoken dreams. And then, the next night, if the flame danced a certain way, they'd say, "Ah, the lamp agrees." So yes, your sleep might begin with a coconut shell. Not just because it's there, but because it means something. It holds oil, light, scent, story. And when you drift off under its glow, you're not just resting. You're entering into a shared silence passed down from someone who once whispered the same sleepy wish over a flickering flame. Light the lamp. Watch it sway. Let the shadows stretch and curl like sleepy fingers on the wall. And know that for 100 years before you, someone else did the same thing, and dreamt of stars painted in coconut light. The coconut lamp still flickers softly nearby, casting shadows that curl like lazy smoke across a thatched ceiling. You shift slightly on your woven mat, listening to the chirp of geckos and the far-off hum of crickets, and the air smells faintly of burnt oil and crushed pandan. But tonight, you're not the only one easing into slumber. Because long before you laid down, entire villages once prepared, almost ceremoniously, for the communal act of sleep. Here's where things get interesting, and maybe just a little adorable. You weren't expected to fall asleep alone in some isolated square of drywall. In many traditional Filipino communities, sleep was a group project. Families curled up together on large mats made from palm leaves or bamboo slats, sometimes layered with soft abaca fiber, like nature's weighted blanket. Kids, grandparents, even a chicken or two, they'd all bed down in the same space. Not quite a slumber party, not quite chaos. Somewhere between the two. You fall asleep to the rhythm of someone else breathing and maybe someone snoring just faintly, like a tiny percussion section. This communal sleeping wasn't just practical, it was deeply cultural. It reinforced the idea that you belonged, always. There was comfort in proximity, in feeling the warmth of others during cooler nights, or knowing someone was there if a dream turned too vivid. And while today's sleep gurus might tell you to banish all noise, back then, it was the occasional cough or muttered sleep talk that reassured you that the world was still gently spinning. Sleeping arrangements followed their own etiquette, too. Elders claimed the cooler, breezier sides of the hut. Children clustered together, limbs tangled like noodles. And if someone rolled into your space, you didn't complain, you just scooted. Complaining could earn you a sleepy-eyed warning and maybe a lazy flip-flop tossed in your direction. And yes, historians still argue whether this style of communal rest was primarily born out of necessity, affection, or simply the physics of limited square footage. But it's hard to argue with results. For generations, this setup nurtured strong family bonds, low anxiety, and an impressive ability to sleep through anything, including roosters going rogue at 4 a.m. Speaking of which, here's a fringe but fun fact. In some provinces, it was believed that if you dreamed of a rooster crowing at night, it meant an unexpected guest was coming. Usually a relative, sometimes a spirit, and occasionally someone selling herbal ointments. So yes, your dreams were monitored by poultry prophecy. Sleep time also meant story time, and this wasn't optional. As the coconut lamp cast its signature glow, parents or grandparents would spin tales. Creation myths, animal fables, spooky warnings about shapeshifters who hated messy rooms. These oral traditions didn't just lull you to sleep, they educated, entertained, and terrified you just enough to keep you from sneaking out after sundown. One classic tale might be about Malakas and Maganda, the first man and woman who supposedly emerged from a split bamboo stalk, kind of like the island version of Adam and Eve, if Eden had better foliage. Another might warn you about the Sigbin, a backward-walking creature that liked to sneak into homes at night and sniff your shadows. You'd pull your blanket up tight after that one. And yes, you can giggle, but in a time before iPads and sound machines, the voice of your grandmother narrating a tale about moon-bathing giants was the very height of bedtime ambience. Especially when she'd occasionally forget how the story ended and just make up something like, "And then the turtle ran for mayor and everyone clapped." Now, let's talk clothing, or the lack thereof. Traditional sleepwear in early Filipino society was all about comfort. Men might sleep in loose bahag, loincloths, women in simple patationg skirts and wrap tops. Fabric was soft, breathable, and woven from natural fibers. There were no tight buttons, scratchy tags, or pajama sets with penguins printed on them. In fact, the word pajama comes from colonial influence. Before that, sleeping attire wasn't categorized, it was simply what made sense in the climate. Some households even slept in nothing but sarongs or woven blankets, especially in the lowland heat. Your skin, like the floor, was meant to breathe. But even these outfits had quiet rituals. A mother might fold each cloth square just so, place it beside your mat, and spritz it with a few drops of citrusy calamansi water, not for hygiene, but for scent and spirit. It was like slipping into a second skin kissed by trees. Here's something delightfully fringe. Some healers believed that dreams could slip through loose knots or poorly tied cloth, so they'd fasten certain wraps with symbolic knots or tuck-in edges under moonlight. No research confirms whether this was effective dream security, but it sure makes modern zippers look boring. By the way, if you sneezed while lying down and someone nearby didn't say, "Ay, may by sita ka, oh, you have a visitor coming," they were considered kinda rude. Sneezes were omens, after all, messages from the air that spirits or luck were walking by. Also, let's not forget the nightly application of herbal balms or massage oils, usually by a patient older sibling or parent. You'd lie down, belly exposed, while warm oil, maybe coconut, maybe infused with lagundi or sambong, was rubbed in slow, methodical circles. It soothed digestion, calmed nerves, and made you smell like a medicinal pancake. If you were lucky, the massage would include whispered lullabies or old chants that no one quite remembered but everyone believed still worked. And if a dog howled nearby, that was a whole thing. Dogs, they said, could sense wandering souls. Some households would respond by turning their mats 90 degrees or sleeping with their heads at the foot end. Not for comfort, mind you, but because you don't challenge ghost etiquette on a Wednesday. So, as your eyes grow heavier and the coconut lamp sinks lower, remember this: bedtime wasn't just the end of the day. It was the beginning of dreaming, of stories, of invisible rituals passed from breath to breath. And in those tucked-in moments, wrapped in palm fiber and quiet, the world felt just a little less lonely. You shift again, just slightly, and in that dreamy space between awareness and sleep, you can almost feel the warmth of that shared mat, the rustle of woven fibers under your skin, the flutter of a mosquito net swaying gently overhead. But just when you think the night is over, there's a gentle clink, the sound of someone adjusting the ting hoi, that trusty coconut lamp. Because not all nights were calm. Some required intervention. Tonight, you're being gently nudged into the curious world of pre-colonial sleep healers, the quiet champions of nighttime peace in the Filipino archipelago. When a child tossed and turned too much, or when an adult muttered in their dreams like they were negotiating with a wayward ancestor, someone usually fetched the albulario or the highlight, the traditional healer. These weren't your average sleepy time assistants. These were folks who knew which herbs quieted nightmares, which chants lulled the body into rest, and which direction you definitely should not sleep if your dreams started taking a dramatic turn. A mainstream historical fact for your cozy mind: albularios often used sleep as diagnostic space. That's right. Your dreams weren't just random brain garbage. They were clues, whispers from your gut, from spirits, from nature itself. Bad sleep could mean bad vibes, or too much wind in your body, or that someone nearby cursed your bamboo pillow. And this is where fringe veers into fantastically specific. Some healers claimed that a sleep knot could form in your back, a tight spot where bad dreams pooled, like a ghostly traffic jam. To fix it, they'd perform a massage at twilight, tracing ancient patterns with their fingers and sometimes drawing circles over your belly button while humming songs older than colonization. They might light incense from dried Damong Maria or cabling Paraiso, herbs believed to dispel dark energy. A few even used seawater in bowls placed beneath your mat to catch wandering spirits that slipped out during REM. Honestly, it was like Dreamcatcher meets pop-up apothecary. Historians still argue whether this sleep healing practice was more spiritual ritual than medical technique, but even skeptics admit, when someone rubbed pomanet oil onto your temple and whispered that all would be well, you believed them. Or at least, you felt cozy enough to drift off. And no, not all interventions were so peaceful. In some communities, children who refused to sleep were told about the puget, a headless being that wandered at night looking for loud, awake little humans to keep it company. If that didn't do the trick, the duende, tiny goblin-like folk, might be blamed for the insomnia. Parents would offer bits of rice or honey outside the door to keep them satisfied. Think of it as ghostly bribery via carbohydrates. Meanwhile, adults suffering from restless nights might be told to sleep with a comb under their pillow, supposedly to straighten confused thoughts, or to whisper their worries into a banana leaf and burn it before bed. Honestly, it's more relaxing than doom scrolling. You stretch slightly, as if mimicking the gentle rub-down you're hearing about. The Highlights methods were more body-based: a warm bath with boiled guava leaves, a series of guided stretches to realign energy, and a quick prayer muttered under their breath as they adjusted your hip with a swift twist that somehow didn't wake your cousin sleeping 2 inches away. Let's talk briefly about what people feared most at night, beyond just the usual anxiety spiral we all know too well. In many villages, there was deep respect, and some trepidation, around the Bangangot. Today, we'd call it sudden, unexplained nocturnal death. Back then, it was whispered about in hushed tones. You were told never to eat too much before sleeping, especially rice or alcohol. And if someone did pass in the night, it was said the Batabat, a large, heavy spirit that lived in trees, had sat on their chest. To prevent this, a common practice: placing a nail or small piece of iron under your pillow. Iron, you see, was thought to ward off spirits who didn't like modern metallurgy. So, if you've ever tucked a safety pin in your sheets for no good reason, well, you're in very old company. And even within these fears, there were customs that leaned oddly sweet. Mothers sometimes hummed lullabies called oyayay, soft rhythmic chants that blended warnings and comfort. One might translate to, "Sleep now, little one, or the wind will carry you, but I will pull you back," which is either beautifully poetic or very emotionally confusing. Depends on your vibe. Also, And this is barely documented but charmingly persistent. Some elders believed your soul wandered off a little when you dreamed. So when you stirred awake suddenly, they'd whisper a gentle balik ka na, come back now, as if calling your sleepy spirit home. A tiny, mystical roll call, just to make sure all the pieces of you were present and accounted for. As the night deepens, you realize sleep wasn't just sleep, it was interaction. With family. With ancestors. With unseen things no one quite dared name. There were rhythms to it, responses, remedies. You didn't take a melatonin gummy and zone out. You prepared, observed, adjusted. Even the act of waking had meaning. If you woke before the rooster crowed, you were considered lucky, or cursed, depending on your dream. If you remembered your dream vividly, you were supposed to tell it before the sun fully rose, or else it might happen again. And if you dreamed of falling teeth, well, you'd better call your cousin. Someone in the family probably needed attention. But for now, no teeth are falling, no spirits knocking, no tree-dwelling ghosts pressuring your chest. Just the Ting Hoi lamp, flickering a little lower, casting golden light across a sleepy room once filled with whispers and oils, lullabies and feather-light footsteps. And as you settle deeper, you realize, the night, in all its mysteries, wasn't something to be avoided. It was something to be navigated, gently, with rituals, wisdom, and the occasional banana leaf confession. The lamp's flame has nearly curled into itself now, dimmer than before, but still warm, like an ember that refuses to be snuffed out before its story is fully told. That soft flicker glows on woven walls, on sleeping limbs gently rising and falling, and on the face of the old woman who, just before nodding off, muttered a final blessing under her breath, directed not at herself but at the night. Tonight you're gliding deeper still, and this time into the architecture of rest, specifically, the way pre-colonial Filipino homes were designed to support sleep. That's right. The entire space wasn't just for survival, but for proper slumber. And yes, it involved bamboo. So much bamboo. If you've ever underestimated the structural ambition of a hollow grass stalk, tonight's a gentle reality check. Your house, if you're imagining yourself in the 15th century somewhere along the shores of Panay or nestled in the highlands of the Cordillera, is probably a Bahay Kubo. Elevated, airy, creaky in a charming way. The floors are slatted bamboo, which means two things. 1, good ventilation, because sweat, and 2, you're constantly terrified you'll drop your last mango slice through the gaps. The roof. Thatched nipa palm, surprisingly waterproof if you tie it properly and sing a song while doing it. Seriously, song weaving was considered good luck. Now, the cool part is how this space wasn't just for daytime chores and cooking up sticky rice. It transformed at night into a collective sleeping space. The mats would unroll. The mosquito nets would descend like sleepy theater curtains. And everyone, yes, the whole family, would find their spot, usually grouped by age, gender, or who snored the least. Mainstream fact here, these homes were deliberately designed with open airflow in mind, to keep interiors cool in the tropical heat. But beyond practicality, it's the little choices that show how seriously rest was taken. For example, many homes had a low platform just outside the front door where people would nap during particularly hot afternoons. Like siesta levels of institutionalized dozing. It wasn't laziness. It was wisdom. Why fight the sun when you can ignore it for 2 hours? Now, let's dial into something quirkier, roof charms. These tiny woven talismans, sometimes made from rice straw or bone, were tucked into the upper corners of the house to guard dreamers. One in particular, shaped like a bird, was meant to ensure your dreams remained sweet and your children didn't sleepwalk straight into the pigpen. Historians still argue whether these were purely spiritual or had some psychological placebo effect. Either way, you weren't supposed to touch them after nightfall. They were on night shift. And no, it wasn't all just rustic vibes and good airflow. There were certain rules, unspoken, but very firm, about what you could do after dark. For instance, sweeping. Sweeping the floor at night was considered a massive no-no. Not just because it was annoying and loud, but because it was believed you'd sweep out blessings, or worse, stir up spirits resting in the corners. So if you made a crumb mess at 9 p.m., too bad. That crumb was your roommate until morning. Another fringe tidbit for your sleepy brain. Some households placed bowls of water under their bamboo beds to mirror dreams. The idea was that the water would reflect back nightmares, keeping them from settling in your mind. And if you had a particularly peaceful dream, that bowl was sometimes sprinkled over plants the next day, like a sleepy, psychic compost tea. Yes, your grandmother absolutely invented spiritual upcycling. Let's talk about sounds. These homes were anything but silent. The bamboo creaked, the frogs held nightly jazz festivals, and the occasional gecko would announce itself with a sound halfway between a squeak and a laugh. But the night wasn't feared for its noises, it was appreciated. That ambient hum of life was believed to lull the mind into relaxation. There's even some evidence that mothers would sync their lullabies to the sound of cicadas, giving kids a double-layered rhythm to rock them into dreamland. Even the stars played a role. You didn't fall asleep under a blank sky. No, elders knew the constellations, though they didn't call them that. They had their own names: Balatik, the hunter; Moraporo, the twin sisters. If a certain star was in a particular position, you might be told to sleep facing east that night, to align your dreams with fortune. Some believed the stars could influence your dreams, or at least eavesdrop on them. Which, makes that one dream you had about talking goats a little more awkward. There was also a quiet hierarchy in the sleeping order. Grandparents usually got the edge spots, partly out of respect, partly because they were the first ones up and didn't want to step over your unconscious limbs. Children often slept between adults like tiny, sticky bookmarks. If you slept alone, it wasn't necessarily a bad sign, but someone might check in on you with a coconut oil dab, just in case. And pillows. You want to talk uncomfortable charm? Try the traditional wooden headrest, which was believed to keep your spine aligned and your dreams undisturbed. It's less fluffy cloud and more stylish plank, but hey, it worked for generations. Plus, ants didn't crawl on it. That's a win in the tropics. Despite the communal vibe, there was an intimacy to the way sleep happened. No one felt disconnected. You heard your sister's breathing change. You knew your father was having a dream about farming again because his fingers twitched in his sleep. You could track your brother's foot inching into your territory and, with one perfectly placed toe nudge, reclaim your ground without opening your eyes. The entire home functioned like a symphony of slumber, noisy, imperfect, but synchronized. And in the faint glow of a coconut lamp, with shadows weaving over the walls and the scent of burnt rice husk lingering gently in the air, you knew that this wasn't just where you lived. It was where your dreams belonged. And as the stars repositioned themselves overhead, perhaps judging you a little for that goat dream, you snuggle a little deeper into your mat, aware now of just how much thought, care, and tradition once went into building a good night's sleep. Not just for one person, but for everyone under the roof. You're already tucked in, the woven mat beneath your back a bit softer tonight, or maybe that's just your imagination drifting with the scent of old banana leaves and a faint whisper of smoked fish from the evening fire. Whatever the reason, sleep feels close, but we're not done yet. No, not until we drift through the sacred lullabies that have floated across generations in the islands, those haunting, honey-thick melodies of forgotten Filipino sleep rituals. Tonight, it's not about where you lay your head, but what sings you into stillness. In pre-colonial barangays and highland communities, bedtime wasn't simply a matter of closing your eyes. Lullabies, or hele, as they're often called, were a cornerstone of nighttime routine, and they were no generic hums. These were hyperlocal, passed from grandmother to mother to child like heirlooms, and often changed slightly with each new voice, like gossip with better pitch. One mainstream fact here: many hele songs served a dual purpose. Yes, they lulled infants to sleep, but they also encoded moral lessons, warnings about wandering spirits, and reminders to respect your elders or risk being turned into a yam by a disappointed duwata. Sweet dreams. A classic example is Ili Ili Tulog Ane from the Visayas, where a mother soothes her child by telling them to rest while she goes to market, and by implication that if the child doesn't sleep, the bugay, a kind of mischievous spirit, might visit instead. So, no pressure, baby. Just sleep or get haunted. And here's your fringe tidbit for tonight. In some upland tribes, hele were believed to be potent enough to calm storms, especially when sung in groups. During the monsoon season, entire families would gather and sing a shared lullaby rhythmically as thunder growled across the sky, not just to comfort one another, but because they believed sound could soothe the environment itself. Think of it like ASMR, but for the atmosphere. Historians still argue whether the storm-calming aspect was more spiritual or psychological. Did the lullabies really still the storm, or just the fear of it? Either way, it's a lovely image. Voices in the dark, fingers intertwined, a melody rising like mist from the valley floor. Most of these lullabies weren't written down. Of course not. They were memorized in muscle and murmured into ears so many times that even grandmothers forgot where they'd first learned them. Sometimes the words didn't make perfect sense. Sometimes they were half-spoken spells, metaphors that made sense only if you'd seen a carabao chase a firefly or tasted jackfruit before the first rain. These weren't top 40 hits, they were nightly anchors to the old world. Now, let's say you're a child again. Your tiny feet are still damp from a last-minute run to the stream. You're nestled beside your siblings, one eye still half open, when your mother begins the evening's tune. Her voice isn't trained, it's not perfect, but it is gentle. Tired. Familiar. It dips slightly on the long syllables and rises like smoke on the high ones. And it's not just her singing, you can hear your older brother humming under his breath, pretending he's not scared of the dark. Even your dog lets out a sigh, like the song tucked itself beneath his fur. You begin to associate this ritual with a kind of psychic blanket. Your mind, restless a moment ago, begins to soften. The frogs outside join in. The bamboo floor creaks gently. The palm roof rustles a slow lullaby of its own. It's not silence, but something better, a hush wrapped in warmth. Certain lullabies were regional. Some spoke of mountains and rice paddies, others of the sea. In coastal areas, many hele had rhythms that mimicked the push and pull of waves. In the Cordilleras, the cadence of the songs could resemble the swaying of tall grasses under wind pressure. Sound and setting matched like two halves of a shell. Kids didn't just fall asleep to these lullabies, they belonged to them. And no one had just one. You might hear a different tune depending on whether you had a fever, whether it was raining, or if your family had just harvested their crops. There were celebratory lullabies, healing lullabies, lullabies meant to carry you into dreams of your ancestors' stories. And let's talk briefly about those dreams. Some families believed that hele guided the direction of dreams. You sing of a white heron, and your child dreams of flying. You hum about buried gold, and they might see shimmering rivers in their sleep. It was thought that the words shaped the subconscious like hands guiding smoke. Sleep wasn't just passive, it was curated. Oh, and don't forget the dads. While mothers typically led the bedtime vocals, in some families, fathers had their own lullabies, often more rhythmic, less melodic, sometimes recited in near whispers. These were lullabies built like chants, soothing through repetition rather than tune. Some were humorous, full of wordplay, others were semi-mythological, threading the exploits of warriors into dreams. It was their way of saying, "Sleep now, but remember where you come from." You get a sense that lullabies, in this world, were more than songs. They were nightly ceremonies, soft invocations. They marked the line between the real and the surreal. Between night and day. Between your body here on the mat, and your spirit somewhere walking through a mango orchard made entirely of memory. There's even archaeological evidence that small wind instruments made from bamboo or bone were played alongside lullabies in some communities. Gentle flutes that mirrored bird calls or the rush of river water. The songs and the flutes didn't just soothe the baby, they reminded the listener of their connection to nature. That even asleep, you belonged to something much older. And what about when someone couldn't sleep? Maybe a child was sick or anxious or had eaten too many bananas too fast. Then came the hele of healing, specific songs whispered into ears, accompanied by a thumb brushed across the forehead. One such song from the Tagalog region contains a line about pulling the shadow away, suggesting that nightmares were viewed as literal things that could be moved or banished through sound. If that doesn't make you want to release a full EP of ancestral lo-fi sleep tracks, I don't know what will. So here you are, lulled in layers, by voice, by breeze, by the certainty that night holds no threat that melody cannot manage. The flame in the coconut lamp trembles a little, maybe in time with the last lingering note of your imagined lullaby. You don't quite know the words, but your body remembers the rhythm. Your breath falls in line. You sleep, wrapped in the music of ancestors you've never met, but somehow still understand. Tomorrow, they'll sing again. Your dream lingers like dew on banana leaves, warm and half-formed, but the story rolls on, because while you float in the rhythm of forgotten lullabies, a new shape rises from the haze, light, flickering, gentle, and entirely made from coconut shells. Yes, tonight, your journey drifts toward coconut lamps, the quiet, glowing companions of Filipino sleep long before LED strips or bedside sconces. In the humid dark, These humble orbs weren't just sources of light. They were storytellers, guardians, and accidental nightlights with a smoky attitude. The coconut itself? A marvel of engineering. Nature's lunchbox, canteen, sponge, soap, and bowl, all in one. But here, we're talking about its reincarnation, the shell. After the sweetmeat was scraped and the milk slurped, the remaining husk was sometimes dried, hollowed, and repurposed into a small oil lamp. You place a wick inside, feed it with coconut oil, and boom, you've got light, sweet-smelling smoke, and just a touch of tropical mood lighting. One mainstream historical fact: these coconut oil lamps, or ting hoi, were widely used across the Philippines until electricity spread more aggressively in the 20th century. But even before then, especially in the countryside and islands less touched by modernization, they glowed nightly from nipa windows and bamboo shelves. The light wasn't bright, more of a gentle pulse. A flame the size of your thumb, barely enough to read a palm leaf manuscript, but perfect for casting dream-shaped shadows against the wall. And at night, when the house is mostly asleep, that little flame becomes its own presence. It breathes when you do. And now for your quirky tidbit. Some folks believed that coconut lamps could smell fear. Not in the monster-under-your-bed kind of way, but in the sense that a troubled or frightened person's presence might cause the flame to sputter or flare. So if you're tiptoeing through a dark house and your ting hoi flickers wildly, don't blame the wind, it might just be your nerves. Or the ghost of your Uncle Ramon who never liked being ignored. Historians still argue whether this belief had roots in spiritualism or was simply a way to explain drafty huts. But either way, it added character to the lamp. You didn't just light it, you checked its mood. And while many coconut shell lamps were functional, others were, let's say, extra. Some were carved with little geometric holes so the light danced like stars on the walls. Others had etched family sigils, regional symbols, or even small protective phrases scratched into the wood. If you're thinking that sounds like the ancient equivalent of a monogrammed Himalayan salt lamp, you're not wrong. Ting hoi lamps weren't always solitary. In wealthier or more social homes, multiple coconut lamps were placed strategically around the house, not just to guide one to the outhouse in the dark, but to create a sort of nightly map. A lamp near the door. A lamp near the baby. A lamp near the altar. You didn't flick on a light switch, you lit a mood, one flame at a time. You picture yourself now, crouched over a shell lamp, flint in hand, listening to the small phfft as the wick catches. The flame is stubborn at first, like it doesn't want to perform for you. But it warms eventually, sighs into existence, and steadies. You carry it carefully. Any sharp movement and you might spill oil on your woven shorts. The floor creaks. A gecko clicks from the rafters. The dark isn't empty, it's waiting for the glow. And that glow. Let's talk color. Coconut oil burns with a warm, amber hue, almost golden. Not sharp like a candle, not cold like an LED. It's sleepy light. Like the fire equivalent of someone humming a tune you half remember from childhood. Add the soft scent of toasted oil and maybe a little wood smoke from the kitchen hearth, and you've got yourself a sensory lullaby. One sweet habit, preserved in oral histories. Some people, especially grandmothers, would talk to their lamps. Just little nothings, thanking the light for burning steadily, or murmuring about how the rain's been coming in sideways again. In moments of solitude, the lamp was a listener. A low-maintenance, glowing confidant. In the uplands of Luzon and Mindanao, there's evidence that coconut shell lamps were also used in sleep rituals for the dying. Families would place one by the head of a fading elder, believing the flame would help guide their spirit across the veil, and that the steadier it burned, the more peaceful the passage. If the flame went out suddenly, some believed the soul had rushed off too fast, perhaps out of excitement. Or, more cheekily, impatience. So, yes, lamps with opinions. And here's something oddly modern. Coconut lamps were portable. Before electric lanterns, if you needed to carry light, you just cupped your ting hoi in a coconut shell base with a little handle and carefully walked it through the dark. Very DIY. Very rustic. Very don't trip on the cat. But it's more than just their portability, it's the ambience. Imagine laying down on a woven mat, your little oil lamp glowing just beside you, casting lazy circles of light on the mosquito net above your head. Shadows shift like waves. The wick hisses quietly. Outside, the cicadas chirp like a backing track. Inside, the lamp waits. Not blinding. Not rushing. Just present. And if the flame ever died in the middle of the night, you didn't panic. You simply reached into the dark, found your bamboo matchbox, and struck another spark. The night would make room again. There's even an old Visayan superstition that if your coconut lamp sputtered 3 times in quick succession, it meant a spirit had entered your home. What kind of spirit? That was left delightfully vague. But just in case, you'd throw a pinch of salt at the base, maybe whisper a prayer, and pretend you weren't totally creeped out. Some adventurous folks believed the tinghoi could act as a kind of lie detector. If you sat 2 people in front of a lamp and asked a tricky question, the flame's reaction could suggest guilt or truth. It's not exactly peer-reviewed science, but hey, neither is that one uncle who can smell rain. Still, nobody wanted to risk it. Eventually, electric bulbs took over. Fluorescents. Halogens. LEDs. Progress came humming and humming louder. But in quiet corners, rural kitchens, ancestral homes, or tucked into storm-ready pantries, the coconut lamps endure. Maybe not for nightly use, but for comfort. For ritual. For remembering. You lean closer to your imaginary tinghoi now. Watch the tiny flame tremble once, as if exhaling with you. It doesn't need to be big. It only needs to glow. You lie still now, weightless in this midnight drift, as the soft flame from your coconut lamp continues to shimmer beside you. But there's one last corner of the night to explore, and it's not made of fire or bamboo or dreams, it's made of rituals. Not grand ceremonies or noisy feasts, but the small, almost invisible gestures that once guided sleep in old Filipino households. Sleep wasn't something you accidentally fell into, it was a process. A routine. A quiet unwinding, passed down through generations with the same precision as a favorite stew or lullaby. And yes, this was centuries before anyone needed a white noise app or a melatonin gummy to get there. Let's begin with a basic, lovely fact. Pre-colonial Filipinos didn't rush sleep. There was no pressure to collapse into bed and be productive again in 6 hours. Rest was sacred. Nights were long, especially during the monsoon months when the days were short and cloud-covered. People respected the dark, and they leaned into it. And so we meet the sleep rituals, a collection of hushed habits performed before bed. Lighting the tinghoi, yes. But also brushing off your mat with a banana leaf, just in case a stray insect or gecko decided it liked your spot better. Some families burned dried herbs, most often tanglad, lemongrass, or sampaguita petals, to clear the air and ward off bad spirits. A kind of pre-colonial aromatherapy. You're probably chuckling now, thinking, okay, cool, ancestral spa night. And yeah, it kind of was. But it had teeth, too. Because hidden within these rituals were serious beliefs about spirits, energy, even dreams as omens. Sleep was a vulnerable time. So the lead up to it, that was defense. Soft defense. One quirky tidbit. In certain Tagalog households, the youngest child was tasked with tapping down the corners of the mat, a symbolic action meant to quiet the house. Like folding the edges of a napkin or smoothing a pillow, it was a tiny declaration. Okay, world, we're done now. The family would then lie close together on the woven mats, often in a circle or U-shape. You'd feel your sibling's elbow somewhere in your ribs. Someone's foot always finds your shin. And yet, somehow it feels right. Safe. Connected. There's a warmth here you won't find in even the fluffiest weighted blanket. Historians still argue whether this practice of communal sleeping was purely practical, about warmth and space, or whether it held deeper spiritual significance. Maybe it was both. Maybe it was just efficient. Or maybe there's something timeless about not wanting to face the dark alone. Now, imagine what you hear. It's not silent. Far from it. The culigligs, cicadas, are practically doing a remix outside. Somewhere a tuco gecko blurts out its signature, tuukohh. A neighbor's pig shuffles in its pen. The wind sighs through the bamboo. And yet, your body relaxes. This is your sleep orchestra. In some regions, the candila, candle, was preferred to the coconut lamp. Especially during storms, when coconut shells were harder to keep lit. But even candles had ritual. It was bad luck to blow them out too fast. You had to pinch the flame gently, or let it die on its own. Killing it too abruptly might insult the Dewata watching over you. And nobody wants to deal with a grumpy forest spirit at midnight. Then there's panaginip, dreams. Old Filipino beliefs treated dreams like letters from another world. A black pig might mean fortune. Falling teeth. Someone's about to pass away. Snakes. You better talk to your crush soon. Dream interpretation was casual but loaded, like reading fortunes from rice grains. And elders took it seriously. You'd wake up, stretch, and get asked, "Ano bang napanaginipan mo?" before you'd even wipe the crust from your eyes. One more sleepy superstition: if you spoke loudly before sleep, your soul might wander too far during dreams. So families kept it whisper quiet after the lamp was lit. Talking slowed. Laughter softened. Even the chickens seemed to respect the vibe. And now, here you are. Lying there, belly full of cassava, head on a woven rattan pillow, not the comfiest, but firm in that oddly satisfying way. The coconut lamp flickers beside you. The mat creaks as someone shifts. You reach out and find your Lola's hand, cool, calloused, reassuring. It's not just about getting to sleep. It's about passing through the curtain of night with intention. Like folding a letter and sealing it, so the next world knows you're on the way. Over time, as Western influences seeped in, beds with mattresses, nightstands, even bedtime television, many of these rituals faded. Coconut lamps turned into decorative curios. Herbal bundles became potpourri. And sleep. It got fast. Convenient. Quiet, but not in the sacred way. In the lonely way. But in some homes, tucked away from highways and neon, the old ways glow quietly. Maybe a grandmother still lights her coconut lamp when the power goes out and murmurs a prayer. Maybe a child still flattens the mat's corners without knowing why. Maybe the wind still whispers like it remembers the steps of a bedtime dance. And you're not just listening to a history podcast. You're participating in a kind of remembering. A ritual of your own. One that doesn't require a mat or a coconut or a superstition, just a bit of stillness, a low hum, and a story. As the night deepens, so does your breath. The images grow softer. The flicker of your imaginary tinghoy grows faint. And if your soul does wander tonight, may it find only calm fields and quiet water. So now, with every breath slower than the last, you settle into that ancient quiet, the one older than cities, older than clocks. The coconut lamp flickers once more in your mind, then fades, its light folding back into the dark like a wave drawn home. There's nothing left to do tonight. No corners left to tap down. No lemongrass to burn. Just this stillness. This warmth. You imagine the bamboo walls around you, swaying ever so slightly with the wind. You hear the distant rustle of palm leaves, like the night is combing its fingers through the trees. Above you, the stars, hidden behind cloud and time, still glow, faint and eternal. Sleep, in this space, isn't a task. It's a gift. A return. And whether you fall into dreams of coconut groves or floating down a river of flickering lamps, you are held. You are safe. You are remembered. Let the breath slow further. Let your thoughts tumble like dry leaves across a quiet floor. You've traveled far tonight, across time, across traditions, and now you rest. You may forget the names, the herbs, the flickers. But the feeling, that soft hush before sleep, that stays. So close your eyes. Soften your jaw. Let the night keep watch. And sleep well.